This final scene of Lesbian Ghost Stories 8 moves beyond simple horror and into something quietly devastating, exploring how guilt, grief, and forbidden connection can linger like spirits themselves, haunting the spaces where love once bloomed but was never allowed to fully live. Raven's story begins with what seems like an ordinary exchange. A tenant moving into a house, a conversation about rent, a passing mention of inheritance. But beneath that polite small talk lies a chasm of unhealed emotion, the revelation that her stepmother left her the home after dying, and that her father now sits in prison for killing her, turns the ordinary into the uncanny. What makes this scene so powerful is how it refuses to sensationalize its premise. The witch stepmother, the haunting, even the unspoken confession of forbidden love, all unfold with emotional restraint, a matter-of-factness that reflects how real shame often hides beneath stillness. Fiona, the new renter, becomes not just an observer but a mirror for Raven's pain. Through her curiosity and compassion, she pulls the truth out piece by piece, helping Raven speak aloud what has been buried for years. That act alone, the willingness to listen to another woman's impossible story without judgment, is profoundly queer in spirit, in a world that has historically silenced women's confessions, especially those involving taboo or trauma. This exchange becomes radical. The haunting here is not supernatural, but emotional. The ghost is memory itself, a symbol of the pieces of ourselves we exile because the world has taught us to. When Raven admits that she was in love with her stepmother, it isn't delivered with the shock or titillation that such a statement might evoke in a lesser story. Instead, it lands with the quiet ache of someone who has spent years trying to name a feeling that never had a place to exist safely. Her love wasn't predatory or exploitative. It was the confused human longing of a young woman who found affection in a place where boundaries blurred under emotional neglect. Queer audiences, especially women, may recognize that sense of misplaced desire, not because it's about the literal relationship, but because it reflects how queer love has often been taught to feel like a mistake, even when it's pure. The story reframes that longing not as corruption but as confusion born from isolation. For Raven, her stepmother Sabrina was likely the first woman to show her warmth, presence, or gentleness. Feelings that for queer girls often become the earliest signs of awakening, even if they can't be fully understood at the time. The tragedy, then, is not in what happened, but in how no one allowed it to be processed with compassion. The father's violent response, his rage upon learning the truth, becomes a manifestation of patriarchal control, a reaction not only to betrayal but to the idea of female intimacy itself. His act of violence cements how deeply society fears women's autonomy, particularly when it's directed toward another woman. In this sense, his imprisonment feels symbolic. He becomes the ghost that lingers through consequence, trapped by his inability to comprehend what love between women could mean. Raven's inheritance of the house, a space that once belonged to both women, becomes a physical representation of inherited guilt. The walls remember, the bed remembers, and now Raven must live among those memories, half terrified, half tethered to them. When she confesses that she's never slept in that bed since her stepmother's death, it speaks volumes. This isn't about fear of ghosts, but fear of returning to the most vulnerable part of herself. The bed becomes a site of unresolved emotion, of love that ended without closure, of forgiveness never spoken aloud. Fiona's proposal to sleep there with her, not as seduction, but as solidarity, carries deep symbolic weight. She is offering to step into the space of pain with her, to bear witness to a trauma that still demands to be named. For queer women, this gesture may feel especially resonant. It's a reflection of what healing often looks like within queer community, not fixing the past, but sitting in its ruins together until the ghosts become quieter. When Raven dreams and the apparition of Sabrina appears, it's the moment where emotional truth transcends realism. The ghost isn't monstrous or vengeful. She's kind, remorseful, maternal even. Her apology is the heart of the scene. She tells Raven it wasn't her fault, that she never should have crossed a line, that she understands why Raven told her father. The tenderness in that exchange reframes everything. The haunting becomes absolution. Sabrina's forgiveness is not about condoning the past, but releasing the shame attached to it. For women who have carried guilt over complicated, misunderstood relationships, especially queer women whose early experiences were shrouded in secrecy, this moment can feel like a balm. It's the rare cinematic acknowledgement that women's emotional complexity does not need to be punished or pathologized. The scene also dares to explore how women internalize responsibility for things that were never fully in their control. Raven apologizes repeatedly, even when Sabrina tells her it isn't her fault, echoing how many queer women grow up apologizing for their feelings, for their existence, for simply being. The supernatural element makes this visible. Forgiveness requires a haunting, as if only through death can women finally speak the truths they were denied in life. But even in that sadness, there's a kind of liberation. When Sabrina says she's been waiting for Raven to sleep in the bed so they can talk again, it's as though she's saying, healing begins where honesty finally rests. The embrace that follows isn't romantic in the traditional sense. It's about reunion, release, and recognition. Two women separated by tragedy finally see each other clearly. It's grief turned into grace. In a broader cultural sense, this ending challenges how society tends to sensationalize or sanitize stories about women's desire. It refuses both the exploitative male gaze and the purity politics that demand women's emotions fit into neat categories. Instead, it allows messiness, contradiction, and sincerity to coexist. That is profoundly queer. It acknowledges that love, especially love marked by trauma, doesn't always make sense, yet it can still be transformative. The ghost here isn't frightening because she's supernatural. She's frightening because she represents the honesty that both women have been too afraid to face. Her return is an act of reclamation, a way for Raven to reclaim her story from the shame and silence that followed it. And through Fiona's empathy, the cycle breaks. By listening without judgment, she gives Raven something Sabrina never could in life, a safe space to feel everything without fear of punishment. This is where the film's emotional intelligence shines. It understands that queer storytelling doesn't have to revolve around perfect relationships or simple identities. It can live in the gray areas, in the haunting, in the longing, in the moments where love hurts but still matters. For queer viewers, especially women who have loved in secret or carried guilt for their feelings, this story becomes more than ghostly metaphor, it becomes recognition. It says, your past doesn't define you, but it deserves to be seen. When Raven whispers I love you to the apparition of Sabrina, it's not an invitation to repeat the past, but a way of setting it free. The haunting ends not through exorcism, but through compassion. And that's the quiet revolution of Lesbian Ghost Stories 8. It turns horror into healing, transforming what could have been a story of shame into one of reclamation. Raven's tears, Fiona's gentle support, Sabrina's final apology. All of it merges into one truth about queer womanhood, that our ghosts are not there to torment us but to remind us of what we survived. In the end, love, even love once misunderstood, becomes the bridge between the living and the lost. The house, once cursed, becomes a sanctuary again. And in that transformation, the film leaves its audience with a message as haunting as it is hopeful. That queer women's stories, no matter how painful or complicated, deserve to be told not as cautionary tales, but as evidence of resilience, forgiveness, and the enduring capacity to love beyond fear.